So we want to talk about like how you got here. What brought you to writing books?
Oof. What brought me to writing books? I never thought that I would write books. I don't know if that was what was in the cards for me. I guess one could argue that it was, but I think when I was a young person, I don't know if I saw that. For me, writing seemed so far away because reading seemed so far away. And at the same time, the lack of reading is what actually encouraged my writing because I wanted to write myself into the world. So as a young person, to me, there was a scarcity. It felt like we were living in a desert when it came to representation, like a representational desert, specifically for kids growing up in the 80s, Black kids specifically, right? Black and brown kids growing up in the 80s and in the 90s. There's a weird gap there, right? And we had these luminaries like Walter D. Myers, but Walter was primarily writing about his experiences in the 70s and in the 60s. So if you're growing up in the 80s and 90s, there's not a lot of accessible, culturally relevant work that's hyper contemporary. 80s, right? You're dealing with the crack epidemic, you're dealing with HIV and AIDS, you're dealing with rap music, right? None of those things exist in the book during that time for kids who were living through that time. So because of that, I didn't read much. It wasn't until I started to fall in love with that music, right? Fall in love with rap music, fall in love with hip hop, which had sort of taken us all by the neck, right? And by the heart and by the stomach. I began to read rap lyrics, and that was my introduction into poetry. And I realized that no one ever told me it was poetry. It's just you start recognizing that the things they're teaching me in school seem so similar to this, except the energy and the topic is different, except the subject matter and the voicing and the style is different. This feels more like me and also like what they're trying to show me. So perhaps I have a space in what they're trying to show me. They just don't know how to show me my version of it. And that began my journey into writing.
And that makes a lot of sense because even when you see teachers in the classroom space that try to loop in the rap lyrics, it never feels authentic unless it's their lived experience.
Exactly. It's got to be your tongue, right? Like I'm always going to be able to, it's like rolling an R if you're trying to speak Spanish. If you don't know it, it's really difficult to learn that, right? That's something that you kind of got to grow up in and you kind of have to be rooted in. And be steeped in. And I think a lot of people try to use it as educational ploys, right? It's like I'm trying to figure out how to hook the kids, which I appreciate. But it's still complicated because young people are looking for people that they believe know them. Like you really know it, right? You're not trying to use it to sort of pander. You're trying to use it because it's a part of you and you generally want to connect with me. And I think that's what the books are meant to do. To help the teachers do this, right? To say like, hey, I may not know it all, but I do like this story. And I can use this story. This story has all the codes that maybe you're used to or what you're looking for. We can engage in that way.
Definitely. How did you decide to target young adults as your age group of writing choice?
I didn't.
No?
I do now. What people don't know about me, what rarely comes up is that I got in this game, in this industry when I was a 21-year-old. And when you're 21 years old and you write this thing and you get this deal, I had no idea what young adult literature was, what children's literature was. I never thought about it. I didn't read it. I had no idea that it was, and it also wasn't always a thing, right? Like middle grade literature and young adult literature just wasn't on my radar. I just happened to be a young adult, right? So I'm writing this thing that I feel is my own and is authentic to my experiences. And when I get this deal as a 21-year-old, they're like, this is great. It'll be young adult. And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. I'm grown. This is for adults because I'm an adult. I look back now 20 years later and you realize that 21, you're coming out of the experiences of your teenage years. You're technically a young adult, and so it naturally skewed toward a younger audience. And so that's where they published me. And once they published me there, then I realized what I had the opportunity to do. I decided to stay. And I realized that it's like the cliche, right? Sometimes life chooses us. And that was my moment where I had been, life chose me instead of me choosing it. And I'm so grateful every day that it did because now I can't really imagine myself writing for many other people. They're the greatest audience in the world and the hardest. Yeah. So if you can do it, if you can get them on your side, then you've done a mighty, mighty thing.
it's not just the hardest age group to target, but when you're talking about Black boys, they usually fall off from reading by the time they get to fourth grade. And so looping them in and engaging them with literature that reflects their lives.
Life or death.
Yeah.
Black boys don't read, perhaps because we're not publishing books about Black boys that they can bite down on, which then might perpetuate their reading. And if we can get off our own high horses and really play to them, right? Really think about who they are and not who we want them to be, it might work. It might just work, and that's kind of where I'm at with it.
So how did your experience in school influence the type of books that you're writing now?
7th grade for me was the strangest year. And it's typically that way.
Yeah.
It was no different for me. One, I was starting a new school. My parents had were in the midst of a divorce. My mother was doing the best she can to try to save our lives. My grandmother dies the same year. So this is the year that I start failing school, struggling in school, dealing with anger, losing my family dynamic as it stood. Older brother's dealing with stuff that he can't quite manage. Mom is doing the best she can to hold it all together, but then loses her mom. And then her mom's death is what propels me to write the first thing I'd ever written. And so what I think about when I'm writing these books is how complex life is for kids. Complex emotions, complex experience, complex environmental contexts, right? Because who you are in school and who you are in a neighborhood are different. Who you are in the neighborhood and who you are in your household are different. Who you are on the way home from school, completely different. Who you are on your sports team, completely different, right? We're talking about complex environment, complex emotion, complex experience, complex friendships and relationships. All this is happening at the age of 12, right? And my whole life is about the teachers who slept on me and who disrespected me, the teachers who believed in me, and how we always knew who was who. And I want to write that in a book. Kids know. I want to see that in a book. The friends who pressure you into doing the things that you don't want to do, and the friends that pressure you into doing the things that you do want to do. They both exist in the book. Love, right? That first hint of what might be something that you've never felt before. And you don't know how to put word to it or to articulate it, but you know that something new is happening in your body. Something new is happening in your mind, and it's making you so uncomfortable, but it also makes you feel like a giant. You feel tiny and you feel, massive simultaneously. What does that mean? What does it mean to be rejected? 7th grade, cut from the basketball team. What do you go through?
There were always two stories happening at the same time. There was several stories happening at the same time. There was his story and his experience and his friendships and building a new friendship. But then there was also his parents' divorce and him processing that, and that thing that's happening where this is the story on the surface, but we recognize as readers that these things are happening behind the scenes and he hasn't gotten there yet. I mean, from my perspective, how you made those craft moves as an author.
For sure. Sometimes we forget, especially when it comes to Black and brown children, we forget that they also still deserve to be naive. They deserve to be innocent. They deserve to not know. Right? I think so often because of the way that so many of us were raised, it's like I know everything happening in my household, right? And I'm expected to take on a greater responsibility because of this information. The truth is, not all of us go through that, and not all of us should. And so in this story, I wanted to write a little boy who was a little boy, right? He cares about his friend, who's a little girl, which is also always important for me to show. That little boys and little girls can be friends in a healthy way, right? And love each other in a healthy way. I wanted to model that. And that his parents are going through this divorce, but he can't see it. He can't quite register what's happening for no other reason than why would he be able to register it, right? He has no sort of experience with it. This is a moment that will change his life forever, right? We know that as adults, like this moment, who he'll be at 16 will be dependent upon this moment. Who he'll be at 26 will be dependent upon this moment. What his relationships will be like will be dependent upon this moment. But he's 10. He can't see that yet. right? He's just sort of experiencing it for the first time. And the other thing is there's like a third layer, right? There's this cartoon that they watch, which is also telling the story of his parents simultaneously and how, and helping him process it subconsciously. Right. Back here, he's realizing like, he's experiencing it already through the cartoon. He's experiencing it in his household. And all he wants to do is save his parents from themselves. Right. Because that's really the heart of a child. Mm-hmm. The heart of a child isn't interested in, this is the beauty of children, is that like mommy and daddy are arguing. I just want them to not argue. Mommy and daddy are saying things that feel mean. I just want them to be nice to each other. It's simple in that way. But just because the simplicity of that particular sort of opinion or the way that he's viewing the world doesn't mean that it doesn't lead to complex emotions, right, on the backside. And I think that's what the book is sort of showing itself, right? How do I deal? I know what I want from my parents, but my chemicals and my physiology is causing anxiety and discomfort in a way that I cannot control. And it's triggering me subconsciously based on what I'm seeing my parents do. I can't explain it, but it's happening. And I'm trying to figure out how to contain myself and contain the peace within my household simultaneously, even though it's not my responsibility, but I feel like it is because I got a good heart and I'm an empathetic child. That's what happens.
One of our focuses as an organization, especially this year, is creating space in classrooms so that we affirm the identities of the children that are there. And we lean heavily into research and understanding around culturally sustaining pedagogy, because we know that these children are coming into our classrooms, they're coming into these spaces, and they have a lot of rich history and a lot of intellect that they're bringing into the spaces. We want to sustain that. We don't want to say, what you did growing up, that's not right. Mm-hmm. This is how we want, this is what it should look like. This is what school's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And so we lean on text to do that. So can you talk about how your text can serve as mirrors and windows for these kids that either experience this or they want a glimpse into the experience of others?
Yeah. I want the young people who perhaps are living in these spaces and feel these things to feel less ashamed. And the young people who may feel on the outside of these spaces to feel less afraid. I think that the power of, and it's not even just we're using books. This is the medium and the vehicle that we are using, thankfully. But really, it's just the power of story. Our stories are the most valuable things that we have. Our narratives are the most expensive things that we will ever own. And I always am trying to figure out ways to fortify a young person by writing a sliver of it. One book is this much of a kid's life, right? We believe that we could write the book that could encapsulate a child's life. And it's like, no, we have to write a library in order to even begin to scratch the surface of the library that is a child. Right. And so I'm always trying to figure out, well, what exactly is the sliver today? For the stunt boy, it's, anxiety and divorce. Right. But in friendship, for a book like Ghost, it's the feeling of overcoming a particular kind of trauma, chosen family. Right. But we need confidence, coaching. What does it mean to have all the books have loving adults? Right? It's a big deal for me to write loving adults because there are a lot of loving adults, right? And children's literature also has to make it a point to show that there are adults in your life for you to run to. It's okay for you to lean on these people, these older people in your life. I think the books can model who we are, where we are, who we'll be, and where we're going. Right? Books have the power to do all those things. That being said, I also think it is necessary to hold the arbiter of those books, to hold their feet to the fire as well. I think teachers have to remember that when we talk about literacy, they have to sort of also acquire new literacies as well. Do you have the social literacy? Do you have the cultural literacy? Because if you can't read your kids, it don't matter whether or not your kids are reading books, right? You have to be able to read the children, right? Do you understand the language of your classroom, right? Don't make the assumption that because I'm Black, I'm trying to read Jason. That's cool. But also, I found my lane already. I know who I am. You don't know who I am. because you haven't learned to read. The children. That's part of it too. You know, that's part of it too. So I think if we remember that, like we start from a place of love. We start from a place of humility, teachers included. We start from a place of empathy, right? We're slower to judge. And then we start bringing in the books and narratives and things of that nature. I just think this is a win-win. And I think it's almost impossible to lose. And I think there's a way for you to be culturally responsive and for us to create pedagogy that says that culturally responsive literature that serves that space is also good for kids who don't exist within that culture, specifically young white kids. It is necessary for young white children to know the lives of their Black and brown classmates. It's important. And we don't talk about it straightforwardly enough, but we should. Because the truth of the matter is that I have had to grow up, and most of us have had to grow up knowing my literature and their literature, quote unquote, which is all, by the way, our literature. But I've had to know my version of it and your version of it, and you've only had to know your version of it. Right? And what happens is because you've only known your version of it, you have a skewed and limited sense on that which is actually real in the world. Right? Because your narratives have been limited. And my narrative that exists within your narrative has been minimized. And so my life within your life has been minimized. You know, so I think it's good for everybody. I rarely mention the race of anybody in a book. Mm-hmm. It's a rarity that I ever say that any kid is Black in the book, but they default Black. And that's a powerful thing because for so long, books have always defaulted white. Right? If a race isn't mentioned, we default the protagonist to a white person. But I rarely say these books are Black, and they're always defaulted Black. And what does that mean? And I want teachers to teach. What does that mean? What does that mean for who we are as human beings? And what does that mean for where we can go as writers and storytellers? And also, what does it mean for some young kid who might not be Black to be like, oh no, this is a Black boy, and to default that way for no reason that is stereotypical and or harmful. That's power. And to watch kids wrestle with trying to figure out what is stereotypical and what isn't. And trying to figure, that's something interesting to see. Because they'll have to wrestle with that for the rest of their lives.
I think that leans back on thinking about the craft moves that you make in your text, mm-hmm. but also using those as mentor texts for students in their own writing. Because like you said, children write the things that they want to see. And so when we give them space for that and when we show them texts that model those types of moves that an author can make, like, why does Mr. wash all of his shoestrings? Right, like, what does that tell you about him? That we want kids to grapple with that. And we also want kids to use that as an avenue to start saying, if I'm writing text, I'm going to think about those characters that might not be the main character, but they have something that's unique and important for me to understand about them. Absolutely. Perspective is important. I mean, we can basically, I think that these books can teach young people perspective and they can develop palette, right? Creative palette. I mean, listen, we all grew up learning and then teaching language arts. My concern is that I think we teach more language than art. And I think we can use this book to teach the art of language. Right? We can use, because there are things in this book that break those rules. There are moments in this book where there are so many words that are made up. In the story, there are commas that are just kind of hanging there, and then the next thing comes maybe on the next line, or there are big words and small words. There are all caps, and there are run-ons, and all this is happening. And so I think what happens is we teach young people the rules, but what we do is we say, this is the way to do something, this is the way not to do something, right? And what I'm always concerned about is maybe we say, these are the effects of these particular rules. These are the effects of this particular style, right? That way you say, look, a comma, it serves this purpose. If you put it here, this is how it affects a sentence. If you don't put it here, this is how it affects a sentence. You get to decide which makes the most sense for you. But there is a part of me that wishes that we could all be a little more honest about the fact that so much of it is subjective. That way we choose to put that comma, it works for you. Because the way you hear it in your head, right? Because the way we've been taught, so the way a sentence is broken up with a subject and a verb, or a subject and a predicate, right? I don't know if it's predicates anymore, subject, verb, agreement, or whatever it is, right? But Toni Morrison almost never uses a comma. And we won't talk about it. James Baldwin is the king of the run-on.
We want to talk about it, right? Do we discuss Faulkner's use of dialect? But we tell kids they can't write in their natural tongue. Zora Hurston did. We love her. We love Faulkner. So when do we get to teach? This is the science of writing. This is the art of writing, and these two things can be different and also symbiotic. And I think that a lot of young people would love writing more if they could stretch out a little bit.
And that's culturally sustaining.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear the phrase literacy to liberation, what does that mean to you?
I think that literacy is freedom. Literally. I think that, and we could even look, the incarcerated population, the percentage of them that are illiterate, of our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated, that are illiterate, is extraordinarily high. There is a direct connection to your ability to read and write and your physical freedom. And so when I hear it, I take my initial reaction, my knee-jerk reaction is I take it literally. And so I always think about young people who can't find the language to name the things about themselves and in their lives. If you can't figure out how to name the thing, then it will bind you. But if you can name it, then you can deconstruct it. We deal with it in mental health, right? I feel all these ways. I feel all that myself, my own personal struggle. When I first was diagnosed with anxiety as a young person, I was dealing with a year of absolute torture because I didn't know what was wrong. And I kept thinking it was this, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's this. And it wasn't until my father was like, this could be clinical anxiety. And I went and talked about it with somebody and got checked out. And once I was able to put a name to it, I was able to manage it. It got so much easier just by attaching a name to it. And so we talk about language in this sort of frivolous way, right? This cavalier way. But the truth is that like this is the thing that actually builds the world, right? Language is the cornerstone to culture, any culture. And any anthropologist will tell you this. Language is what builds culture. Right? So if language changes, culture changes. But if language doesn't exist, then nor does culture. Right? So if language inside my body doesn't exist, then the sort of culture of self has no footing, has no substance. It's paper thin. That's a scary thing for a human being. Right? And this is what, literacy to liberation to me, right? This is what I think it means.
So you said something about how you knew the teachers who were there for you and the ones that weren't. Can you talk about a teacher in particular as you were growing up that you knew they were there for you and how you knew?
The two that mean the most to me are Miss Blaufus in high school, 10th grade English. And I knew she loved me because she didn't give me, I didn't do well, but she always told me like, hey man, I see the talent in my writing. She'd say like, I'm gonna give you a C on this paper. Because you don't know how to follow instructions. But I can see your ability. You got chops. You're doing something interesting. You have something. She even told my mom, like, hey, make sure that if he goes to college, try to get him in a good writing program. Try to get him in a school that has a good writing program. Right? She was a gift to me. We're still very good friends. For all of you who read the Spider-Man book, she's in the book. She is the English teacher. Her name and everything. Right? Like to show her some love. And then I had Mr. Williams, who I've talked about ad nauseum, he taught me how to be a person. And a white man teaching in an all black school. And we gave him the blues. It's freshman, sophomore, and junior. You couldn't take him until you were a senior. We gave him the blues. And when you took his class senior year, we all sort of had to eat crow because he loved us so much. And he made it clear through not just through his discipline, but in what and how he chose to teach us. We're learning about, it's a global studies class. Well, really, it was a fancy way for him to teach us what it means to be human in the world, what it means to know that your way ain't the only way. We had to eat crickets one time, right? And it was a wild experience. He was like, yeah, we eating crickets? And we're like, what are we eating crickets for? He like, y'all really think that, the whole world eat hamburgers. It's like people in India ain't eating no hamburgers because they're not eating the cow, right? And so to you all, these are bugs and it's nasty, but to somebody else, this is a delicacy. And you have to be thinking about that so that you're less judgmental in the world, right? You ain't always got to try everything, but be open-minded. And that was his whole thing. You know, he taught us about sacrifice, about courage, about adventure. And I think that was his whole thing, was just life is a beautiful thing. You are part of that beauty. Don't close yourself off to it. I will forever be indebted to him. And I talk to him. He sends me letters every month. I'd see him twice, 3 times a year. He is, it's been the most incredible love affair. 20 years of somebody that I really believed saw us, loved us, and sacrificed tremendously to make sure that we knuckleheads had a fair shot.
That's amazing.
Oh, the greatest gift you could give a kid is to say you don't know. It's to say, like, honestly, we can learn that together. Maybe you know. And then let them teach you something. Right? And I think these are the things that I wish that these are things that Mr. Williams knew, that Miss Blaufus was same thing. A lily white woman, fresh out of Yale, who had come to this school and was wonderful. Understood how to see us as we were. This is who they are, and I love them for who they are. And I'm going to do my best not to fix them, right? I'm not trying to save you. I'm just trying to see you. That's the goal, right? I'm trying to save you, baby. You're going to save yourself. If I do my job, you're going to save yourself. I'm just trying to see you. And if I can see you, then you'll know that saving yourself is possible.
We serve 60,000 kids, 6 states, across the country. What message would you want to leave them with?
To know that I love them. This is such a simple thing, that I'm grateful for their lives. The truth of the matter is that none of us have any purpose without them. The least we could do is thank them, right? Because they're actually the ones who are going to take on whatever it is you think you build it in a vacuum. It's never about you. It's always about them. It'll always be that way. The least we could do is extend a note of thanks and gratitude for no other reason than the fact that they are here, that they are amazing. I think personally they're the smartest generation that has ever lived. I think that they will do twice as much in half the time. And if we all do our jobs, they'll be able to be effective at it, right? I only have one role, and that is to serve our young people so that they can grow and serve the world. Simple, right? And so all I want them to know is that I love them first and foremost, and that I believe that they have the capacity to do just that. If they know. That's it, if they know. And what the books are meant to do is to make sure that they know. What the teachers are meant to do is to make sure that they know. It's that simple for me. They'll take it from there.